September 1944 dawn breaks gray and cold over the rolling hills of Lorraine. France, the morning mist clings to the earth like ghostly fingers, and somewhere in the distance, the rumble of heavy machinery echoes across the autumn countryside. Staff Sergeant Thomas Mitchell adjusts his leather gloves inside the cramped commander's position of his M18 Hellcat. The steel cold against his palms despite the warming engine below. The smell of diesel fuel and gun oil fills the air as he peers through his periscope at the tree line ahead. His crew is silent, tense, waiting. They can hear it now, the distinctive growl of German Maybach engines. Growing louder with each passing minute, the Panzers are coming. This moment, frozen in time near the small French village of Arracourt, would mark the beginning of what military historians would later call the greatest vindication of American tank destroyer doctrine in the European theater. For months, Wehrmacht commanders had grown accustomed to a certain rhythm of armored warfare, their heavy Panthers and Tigers dictating the terms of engagement through superior armor and firepower, forcing Allied forces into costly frontal assaults or lengthy flanking maneuvers. The German tank crews had faced Sherman tanks, British Cromwells, and Soviet T-34s. They understood these machines, their capabilities, their limitations. What they had not encountered, what their tactical manuals had not prepared them for, was a tracked vehicle that could achieve 55 miles per hour on open ground while carrying a gun capable of penetrating their armor at combat ranges. The M18 Hellcat represented a radical departure from traditional armored warfare philosophy. While German engineers had pursued ever thicker armor and more powerful guns, American designers at the General Motors Corporation had chosen a different path entirely. Under the direction of the Ordnance Department's aggressive tank destroyer program, they had created what was essentially a high-velocity, anti-tank gun mounted on the fastest track chassis ever to see combat, the Continental R975 radial engine. The same power plant that drove American bombers through the skies over Europe could push the 18-ton Hellcat to speeds that defied everything the German armored forces thought they knew about mechanized warfare. Obergefreiter Klaus Weber had been fighting in Panzer IV Ausf tanks since the retreat from Normandy. His crew had survived the desperate fighting around Falaise, the grinding withdrawal across the Seine, and now found themselves part of the hastily reformed 113th Panzer Brigade. Thrown into Lorraine as part of Hitler's desperate attempt to halt Patton's advance toward the German border, Weber's tank carried the scars of a dozen engagements, welded patches over shell holes, spare track links hanging from the hull like iron scales. He had learned to respect American Sherman tanks for their reliability and numbers, but never to fear them. The Sherman 75mm gun could not penetrate his frontal armor at normal combat ranges, and even the newer 76mm versions required careful positioning to achieve a killing shot. This morning, however, as his commander's voice crackled through the intercom reporting, Amerikanische Panzer, moving at impossible speeds across the open ground, Weber began to understand that the war had introduced him to something entirely new. The tactical doctrine that had served German panzer forces so well throughout the early war: controlled advances with mutual fire support, deliberate positioning to maximize armor effectiveness, methodical destruction of enemy forces through superior firepower, suddenly seemed obsolete. The Hellcats moved like no armored vehicle the Germans had ever encountered. They would appear on a ridgeline, fire several rounds with devastating accuracy, and disappear before the German gunners could traverse their turrets to engage. By the time the Panzer commanders had identified the firing position and brought their guns to bear, the American tank destroyers were already repositioning, appearing moments later from an entirely different direction to deliver another killing volley. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion in support of the 4th Armored Division, would later write in his after-action report, "The Hun expected to fight us as he had fought the British methodical advances, predetermined firing positions. Predictable tactical movements, the speed of the M18, completely disrupted his defensive calculations. We could achieve firing positions he considered impossible. Withdraw before effective return fire could be directed, and reappear where he least expected us. The morning of September 19th unfolded like a deadly choreographed dance across the fields near Réchicourt. Elements of the German 113th Panzer Brigade, expecting to encounter the usual American combined arms formation of Sherman tanks supported by infantry and artillery, instead found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to violate the fundamental principles of armored warfare. The Hellcats would race across open ground at speeds approaching 40 miles per hour, their crews enduring bone-jarring rides that would have been impossible in heavier vehicles. The thin armor that critics had condemned as inadequate became an asset. Every pound saved translated into greater speed, better mobility, enhanced survivability through movement rather than protection. Sergeant Mitchell's Hellcat, designated Sidewinder by its crew, exemplified this new approach to tank warfare as German Panzer IVs crested the hill near Réchicourt. Mitchell's driver, Corporal Danny Sullivan from Detroit, had already identified 3 different escape routes and positioned the vehicle for maximum mobility. The gunner, Technical Sergeant Robert Hayes, had ranged the likely enemy positions with his 76mm M1 gun, while the loader, Private First Class Tony Romano, had arranged the ammunition for rapid sustained fire. When the first German tank appeared, silhouetted against the morning sky, the engagement lasted exactly 97 seconds. Hayes fired 4 rounds, achieving 3 direct hits on 2 different targets, before Sullivan had already begun their high-speed withdrawal to the next firing position. The psychological impact on German tank crews proved as devastating as the physical destruction. Unteroffizier Heinrich Müller, a veteran panzer commander with the 2nd Panzer Division, later recalled in his memoirs, "We had trained for years to fight enemy tanks that behaved like tanks moving at predictable speeds, firing from stationary positions following standard tactical procedures. These American vehicles moved like cavalry, appearing and disappearing faster than we could react. By the time our gunner had acquired a target, it was gone. It was like fighting ghosts that could kill." The speed differential created tactical possibilities that neither side had fully anticipated. While German Panthers possessed superior armor and firepower in a direct engagement, they could achieve maximum road speeds of only 25 miles per hour, and cross-country mobility was further limited by their weight and mechanical complexity. The Hellcat's speed advantage was not merely numerical, it represented a qualitative transformation in the nature of armored combat. American tank destroyer crews could choose when and where to fight, dictating the terms of engagement in a way that negated many of the German technological advantages. Captain William Donnelly, commanding Company B of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, described the tactical revolution in his unit's war diary. "Speed became our armor. Every engagement followed the same pattern: rapid advance to firing position, multiple accurate shots on target, immediate withdrawal before enemy response." The German crews were trained to fight set-piece battles with predetermined positions and overlapping fields of fire. Our mobility made their tactical preparations irrelevant. The M18 76mm M1 gun, while not as powerful as the German 88mm or the British 17-pounder, proved entirely adequate for its intended mission at the combat ranges typical of the Lorraine, fighting between 800 and 1,200 yards. The American gun could penetrate the side and rear armor of any German tank in service, including the feared Panther. The high-velocity armor-piercing rounds, designated M93, carried enough kinetic energy to punch through 80 millimeters of homogeneous steel plate at 1,000 yards, more than sufficient to defeat the flanks of German medium tanks. But penetration statistics told only part of the story. The Hellcat's true advantage lay in its ability to achieve firing positions that traditional tank doctrine considered impossible. German defensive planning assumed that anti-tank guns would occupy prepared positions with clear fields of fire, allowing panzer crews to identify and engage threats in a predictable manner. The American tank destroyers, however, could race across supposedly impassable terrain, appear on flanks thought to be secure, and vanish before effective countermeasures could be implemented. Private Romano, the young loader from Brooklyn, whose grandfather had immigrated from Sicily, found himself at the center of a technological revolution he could barely comprehend. His job was simple: keep the gun fed with ammunition, maintain the vehicle's machine gun, and hold on during the wild rides between firing positions. But as he later wrote to his sister Maria, "These German tanks, they're like heavyweight boxers, slow, powerful, dangerous if they catch you, but we're like Sugar Ray Robinson, dancing around them, hitting them where they can't hit back. Every time they turn to face us, we're already gone." The analogy to boxing proved remarkably apt. The Hellcat crews had adopted tactics reminiscent of a skilled welterweight facing a powerful but slower opponent. Constant movement, quick strikes, never allowing the enemy to bring his strength to bear, the thin armor that made the M18 vulnerable in a direct exchange became an asset when combined with speed and tactical flexibility. As Sergeant Mitchell observed, "Better to avoid getting hit than to rely on armor to stop enemy shells." By midday on September 19th, the tactical situation had evolved into something unprecedented in the European theater. German Panzer commanders found themselves unable to maintain cohesive defensive formations when individual tanks could be isolated and destroyed by fast-moving American tank destroyers that appeared and disappeared like wraiths. The carefully planned German counteroffensive, designed to exploit what intelligence reports described as typical American tactical predictability, instead encountered an enemy that seemed to have rewritten the fundamental rules of armored warfare. Oberst Wolfgang Fischer, commanding the 113th Panzer Brigade, radioed his divisional headquarters with growing frustration. Enemy tank destroyers achieving speeds impossible for tracked vehicles. Standard defensive tactics ineffective. Request immediate air support and anti-tank gun reinforcements. The response, when it came, reflected the broader German confusion about American tactical capabilities. Confirm enemy vehicle specifications. No tracked vehicle capable of reported speeds. The German disbelief was understandable. Their own experience with tracked vehicles suggested absolute limits on cross-country mobility. The Panzer IV, their most reliable medium tank, struggled to maintain 20 miles per hour over rough terrain. The Panther, despite its formidable combat capabilities, was plagued by transmission problems and suspension failures that made high-speed movement extremely risky. The Tiger I, their most powerful tank, was so heavy and mechanically complex that sustained speeds above 15 miles per hour often resulted in mechanical breakdown. American designers had approached the problem differently. Rather than pursuing maximum protection and firepower, they had optimized for the specific mission of tank destruction. The M18's open-top turret, criticized by some as a vulnerability, actually contributed to weight savings and crew situational awareness. The torsion bar suspension, adapted from German designs but refined for American manufacturing capabilities, provided superior cross-country performance. Most importantly, the Continental radial engine delivered exceptional power-to-weight ratio while maintaining the reliability American forces required for sustained operations. Technical Sergeant Hayes, the gunner whose accuracy had already accounted for 3 German tanks, represented the human element in this technological equation. A former automobile mechanic from Cleveland, Hayes understood machinery in ways that purely military training could not provide. He had learned to compensate for the Hellcat's movement while firing, to judge range and deflection, while his vehicle bounced across terrain at speeds that would have been impossible in heavier tanks. His shooting, like that of hundreds of other American tank destroyer gunners, combined peacetime automotive experience with wartime tactical innovation. The secret, Hayes later explained to replacement crews joining the 704th Battalion, is understanding that we're not tanks pretending to be fast. We're fast vehicles that happen to carry anti-tank guns. Everything about how we fight comes from that speed. We don't take ground and hold it. We take shots and disappear. The afternoon brought the climactic engagement of the day's fighting German reinforcements, including elements of a Panther battalion hastily redirected from the Metz fortifications, attempted to restore the tactical situation through concentrated firepower and superior armor. The Panthers, with their long-barreled 75mm guns and thick frontal armor, represented the most advanced German tank technology in widespread service. Their crews, many of them veterans of the Eastern Front, brought hard-won experience in facing superior enemy numbers through technical superiority and tactical discipline. But the American tank destroyers had evolved beyond the tactical parameters that German training anticipated when the Panthers advanced in traditional formation, hull down positions with overlapping fields of fire that Hellcats simply refused to engage on German terms. Instead, they used their speed to achieve flanking positions that rendered the Panthers' frontal armor irrelevant. The thick steel that could deflect Sherman rounds with impunity became useless when American guns could achieve side shots at ranges where penetration was virtually guaranteed. Sergeant First Class Eduardo Gonzalez, commanding a Hellcat nicknamed Border Runner, exemplified this new approach to armored warfare. Born in El Paso, Texas, Gonzalez had learned to drive in the harsh terrain of the American Southwest, where mechanical reliability and speed often meant the difference between arriving safely and being stranded in the desert. His crew, Irish-American driver from Boston, Polish-American gunner from Chicago, Italian-American loader from Brooklyn, represented the industrial diversity that had made American wartime production possible. We hit them from angles they didn't expect, Gonzalez reported, while they were positioning to engage what they thought were fixed anti-tank positions. We were already moving to get behind their flanks. Speed gave us options they couldn't counter with armor or firepower alone. The German response revealed the depth of their tactical confusion. Trained to fight methodical battles where superior individual tank performance could overcome numerical disadvantages, Panzer crews found themselves unable to exploit their technical advantages against an enemy that refused to fight on traditional terms. Radio intercepts captured German tank commanders repeatedly requesting clarification of American vehicle capabilities, as if understanding the specifications might provide a tactical solution to the mobility problem. Hauptmann Karl Steinberg, a company commander, the Panzer Regiment, transmitted what became one of the most revealing German assessments of American tactical innovation. Enemy tank destroyers moving at cavalry speeds, but fighting like artillery, unable to maintain contact long enough for effective engagement. Traditional anti-tank tactics, ineffective against this mobility. The evening of September 19th brought statistical confirmation of what individual tank crews had experienced throughout the day. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion reported 26 confirmed tank kills against the loss of 3 M18s, a ratio that exceeded even the most optimistic pre-war projections for American tank destroyer effectiveness. More significantly, the speed and mobility that critics had dismissed as sacrificing protection for questionable tactical advantage had proven capable of revolutionizing armored warfare itself. But statistics alone could not capture the psychological transformation that had occurred on both sides of the engagement. American tank destroyer crews, many of whom had entered combat wondering whether their lightly armored vehicles could survive against German Panzers, discovered that speed and tactical flexibility could provide better protection than steel-plate German Panzer crews. Accustomed to dominating battlefields through superior individual tank performance, found themselves unable to bring their advantages to bear against an enemy that seemed to operate according to entirely different principles. The symbolic significance of the day's fighting extended beyond tactical innovation to fundamental questions about American industrial philosophy and democratic values. The M18 Hellcat embodied characteristically American solutions to military problems, mass production of reliable, standardized equipment rather than small numbers of technically superior but complex machines. Where German industry had pursued perfection in individual weapon systems, American manufacturers had optimized for quantity, reliability, and logistical sustainability. The Continental R975 engine that powered the Hellcat to its remarkable speeds was the same basic power plant used in training aircraft, transport vehicles, and industrial equipment throughout the American economy. This commonality of components meant that maintenance, spare parts, and crew training could draw upon the vast reservoir of civilian mechanical knowledge that American mobilization had brought into military service. Sergeant Hayes's background as an automobile mechanic, Corporal Sullivan's experience driving delivery trucks in Detroit, Private Romano's work in his family's garage, these peacetime skills translated directly into wartime effectiveness in ways that purely military training could not duplicate. German industry, by contrast, had pursued technical excellence through specialized, complex systems that required extensive specialized training and support. The Maybach engines in German tanks were marvels of engineering precision, but they demanded maintenance skills and spare parts that were increasingly difficult to provide as the war progressed. The result was a growing disparity between theoretical technical superiority and practical battlefield effectiveness. This industrial philosophy reflected deeper cultural differences between American democratic capitalism and German authoritarian militarism. American weapons development emphasized standardization, mass production, and adaptability, values that mirrored the democratic ideals of equality, opportunity, and individual initiative. German weapons development pursued hierarchical perfection, with small numbers of technically superior systems operated by elite specialists, reflecting the authoritarian preference for concentrated excellence over distributed capability. The M18's success at Arracourt demonstrated that democratic industrial values could produce military effectiveness that matched or exceeded authoritarian alternatives. The American tank destroyers succeeded not through superior individual performance, but through the integration of reliable mass-produced technology with the initiative and adaptability of democratically trained crews. Every Hellcat crew included soldiers from different ethnic backgrounds, different regional experiences, different civilian occupations, diversity that proved to be a strategic asset rather than a weakness. Private Romano's letters home captured this democratic dimension of American military effectiveness. Our crews, like America itself, Irish, Italian, Mexican, all working together. The Germans, they're all the same, all following the same orders, all thinking the same thoughts, but we can improvise, we can adapt. We can figure out solutions they never expected. As autumn deepened into winter, the tactical lessons of Arracourt spread throughout both armies. American tank destroyer doctrine, vindicated by combat experience, emphasized speed and flexibility over armor protection. German anti-tank tactics evolved to address the mobility threat, with increased emphasis on mines, prepared defensive positions, and air support to counter fast-moving American tank destroyers. But the fundamental disparity in industrial philosophy could not be overcome through tactical adaptation alone. German factories, despite their technical sophistication, could not match American production volumes while maintaining quality standards. American industry benefiting from secure supply lines and abundant raw materials, continued to improve both quantity and quality throughout the war's final phases. The Hellcat crews who had survived the September fighting found themselves part of an evolving tactical revolution that would influence armored warfare for decades to come. The principles they had discovered through combat experience, speed as protection, mobility as firepower multiplier, tactical flexibility as strategic advantage, would inform American military doctrine throughout the Cold War and beyond. Sergeant Mitchell, whose Sidewinder had survived the day's fighting without serious damage, wrote in his personal diary, "Today we learned that American machinery, American training, and American fighting spirit can overcome any enemy advantage. Speed, teamwork, and determination matter more than thick armor and big guns. We proved that democracy can build better weapons and train better soldiers than any dictatorship." The M18 Hellcat's triumph at Arracourt represented more than tactical innovation or technological superiority. It demonstrated the capacity of democratic societies to produce military effectiveness through the integration of industrial capability, individual initiative, and collective purpose. The 55 miles per hour that had shocked German Panzer crews was not merely a technical specification, it was the manifestation of American values translated into battlefield advantage. In the months that followed, M18 Hellcats would participate in the liberation of France, the crossing of the Rhine, and the final assault on Nazi Germany itself. Their crews would face improved German anti-tank weapons, more sophisticated defensive tactics, and increasingly desperate enemy resistance. But the fundamental lesson of September 19, 1944, would remain constant, that American industrial democracy could produce weapons and warriors capable of defeating any totalitarian challenge. The statistics compiled after the war confirmed what individual combat experiences had suggested. The M18 Hellcat achieved the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armored fighting vehicle in the European theater, 24-1 overall, with 526 confirmed enemy tank destructions against 216. M18s lost to all causes. These numbers represented not merely superior equipment performance, but the effectiveness of democratic training, industrial integration, and tactical innovation working in combination. But perhaps the most significant measure of the Hellcat's success was not statistical, but psychological. German tank crews, who had entered the war confident in their technical and tactical superiority, found themselves increasingly unable to dictate the terms of armored engagement. The American tank destroyers, with their combination of speed, firepower, and tactical flexibility, had introduced an element of uncertainty that German military doctrine could not accommodate. Obergefreiter Weber, the veteran Panzer IV commander, would survive the war to reflect on his experiences during the Lorraine fighting. "We had been taught that superior individual weapons could overcome numerical disadvantages through proper tactics and crew training, but the Americans showed us that superior mobility could make individual weapon advantages irrelevant. They forced us to fight their kind of war, not ours." This tactical revolution reflected the broader transformation of warfare itself during the Second World War. The static, position-oriented combat that had characterized much of the First World War gave way to fluid, mobile operations that emphasized speed and flexibility over firepower and protection. The M18 Hellcat, more than any other single weapon system, embodied this transformation and demonstrated its potential for decisive battlefield effect. As winter settled over the Lorraine countryside, the burnt-out hulks of German tanks served as monuments to a vanished tactical orthodoxy. The Americans had proven that speed, properly employed, could achieve what armor and firepower alone could not: the ability to choose when, where, and how to fight. This freedom of tactical choice multiplied across hundreds of engagements throughout the remaining months of the war, would prove decisive in the final collapse of German resistance. The young Americans who crewed the Hellcats carried with them not merely superior equipment, but the confidence that came from knowing their democratic society could produce whatever tools victory required. They fought not as subjects compelled to serve, but as citizens defending values they understood and believed in. This psychological advantage, perhaps more than any technical specification, explained their ability to adapt, innovate, and overcome challenges that had defeated more traditionally trained opponents. The sound of Continental radial engines, once exotic on European battlefields, became as familiar as the roar of Sherman tanks or the drone of Allied aircraft. But unlike those other American machines, the M18 Hellcat represented something uniquely American: the marriage of industrial capability with individual initiative, of mass production with tactical innovation, of democratic values with military effectiveness. Years later, military historians would debate the precise factors that made the Hellcat so effective in its intended role. Some would emphasize technical specifications, the power-to-weight ratio, the gun's penetration capabilities, the suspension's cross-country performance. Others would focus on tactical innovation, the development of shoot-and-scoot tactics, the emphasis on mobility over protection, the integration of speed with firepower. But for the men who had lived through those autumn days in Lorraine, the explanation was simpler and more profound. They had discovered that American democracy could produce warriors and weapons capable of defeating any authoritarian challenge. The 55 miles per hour that had revolutionized armored warfare was not merely a measure of mechanical performance, it was the speed of freedom itself, moving across the battlefields of Europe to restore liberty to enslaved nations and justice to a world torn by totalitarian ambition. In the end, the M18 Hellcat's greatest victory was not tactical or technical, but moral. It demonstrated that free men, properly equipped and trained, could outfight the products of any authoritarian system. The speed that had shocked German Panzer crews was the velocity of democratic values, proving once again that liberty, properly defended, moves faster than oppression can follow. The sun set on September 19, 1944. Over a battlefield transformed. The German Panzers that had advanced that morning in confident expectation of tactical success lay silent in the gathering darkness. American Hellcats that had met them were already preparing for the next day's fighting, their crews cleaning weapons, checking equipment, and planning the continued advance toward the Reich's borders. But more than territory had been won that day. The fundamental assumptions that had governed armored warfare since the tank's invention had been overturned by American ingenuity, democratic values, and the simple but profound discovery that sometimes the best armor is the ability to avoid being hit at all. The Hellcat had proven that freedom, properly equipped and courageously applied, could indeed outrun tyranny at 55 miles per hour of pure American fury.